Hi, and welcome to another Acts Church Subversive devotional thought. You've been reading along with us. It's been a short little read, basically chapter 26, where we've seen Paul make a defense of himself before King Agrippa. And I will admit I'll cheat a little bit because I've been in Acts 26 as we prepare for this coming Sunday, but I'm glad to give a little thought on some other parts that I won't get to come Sunday sermon. Do you ever have the impression or maybe you don't want to admit it, but that you wonder if certain people or certain people in certain situations, certain circumstances, certain hearts, certain indications have really no interest in Jesus, will never come to faith, will not show any desire for Jesus or following the Christian way of life, whether it be, again, their circumstances, just hard times, difficult situations that keep them from even being interested, get caught in a group of people that shows no concern for faith matters, or people who are, so caught in their lifestyle that they would say that they have no need for a God, for Jesus. Um, I will admit there's a number of times where I run into people where I wonder, will these people ever come to a faith? Will they ever have a longing or an interest? And I find this text, although it says many, many things, something in here that catches me and gives me hope. Um, if you were reading along, again, Acts 26, and you realize that as Paul makes his defense before King Agrippa, he gives a bit of a story about himself. And again, he shares his Damascus Road journey. But in that, he's saying or giving indication of he's part of this Pharisee crowd. And in that crowd, in verse 9, he says, I too was convinced that I ought to do all that was possible to oppose the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And that is just what I did in Jerusalem. On the authority of the chief priests, I put many of the Lord's people in prison, and when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. Many a time I went from one synagogue to another to have them punished, and I tried to force them to blaspheme, to speak against. And so I was so obsessed with persecuting them that I even hunted them down in foreign cities. Here's a person that if I were to run into, I would say, this person shows no interest, no hope for Jesus. In fact, he's so adamantly opposed to him that he's going to persecute. I don't hold out any hope. And my thought would be, well, it's kind of a lost cause. But Paul, in making his defense, and I think by nature of his own experience, he's speaking to another person of Jewish heritage, someone who's in great deal of power, someone who's going to sit over judgment in him. And Paul ends his speech in verse 25, after he's been called insane for all this learning and thinking about Jesus and the resurrection, he says, I am not insane, most excellent Festus, Paul replied. What I'm saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I'm convinced that none of this has escaped his notice, because it was not done in a corner. And King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do. And King Agrippa says to Paul, do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? And Paul replied, short time or long, I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am except for these chains. Paul doesn't think anybody is out of question for God's grace. Paul is convinced that because I think he has been saved, one who is so adamantly opposed to Jesus and yet had his life completely turned around, crazily, is believing that anybody and everybody should hear the gospel and can be convinced of the good news of Jesus Christ. For me, that's deeply encouraging. It's a good check on my own assumptions of other people. So as you're day to day on your journeys and you run into people, you meet people, you hear about people in the news and you think, maybe you don't care, maybe you do care, maybe you think it's hopeless. Take hope from Paul that no one is beyond the reach of the resurrection. No one is beyond the reach of hope of the gospel. No one is beyond the reach of God's mighty work. And Paul is convinced to the point that he's willing to share it, even to those who might accuse him and put him to death. He is unafraid to share it because he hopes and believes that anybody and everybody can be saved. Go with that hope and see people with new eyes. Peace.